Well, good morning everyone and welcome to our event, which is Green Great Britain, the environmental case for the Union. My name's Colin, I'm Head of UK Programmes for the Conservative Environment Network, or CEN. We have 18 public events over 3 days at this year's conference, and you can view our full programme of events at cen.uk.com/conference, or there's a really handy leaflet just on this table over here. We're the independent forum for everyone on the centre right who believes in conservation and decarbonisation. And before we get started, let me thank Storegga and the Scottish Cluster for sponsoring this event. It simply wouldn't be possible to have these debates without their generosity. Today's discussion will centre on how England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland can achieve better environmental outcomes by working together. Despite all the ink that has been spilled about the constitutional future of the UK, little has been said about how the strength of the Union could help us tackle climate change, reach net zero and leave a better world for future generations. So is net zero an untapped asset for unionism? Should we do more to highlight the investment the UK government makes in renewables and carbon capture and green industries across the UK, and the UK-wide businesses and supply chains that make green growth possible? Or, by introducing a constitutional angle, do we risk dividing the public on what is quite a politically unifying issue? Can I remind speakers they have 3 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will proceed to an audience Q&A. So please do raise your hand as soon as you have an incisive question to put to our panellists, but please do make sure it's a question and not a comment. First up, we have Andrew Bowie to my right. He's the MP for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, a Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, and also a renewables champion for the Conservative Environment Network.
Thank you, Colin. It's great to be here this morning. Good morning, everybody. And what is, you're absolutely right, Colin. It's amazing that 7 years on from the Scottish independence referendum, 10 years since the SNP gained a majority in Holyrood, and with all the talk and debate about net zero and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and all the rest of it, we just haven't spoken about the environment in the constitutional context at all. And so can I thank you and thank CEN for actually having this debate today, because it's really important. And to answer your 3 questions, I would say yes, yes, and yes. I do think that there's an environmental case for the Union. We can do much more together than we ever could apart. And I don't think it risks dividing the public, because I think when you make the case, we hear Nicola talking, the First Minister. When we hear the First Minister talking about how we need to work together with other nations around the world, work with our partners in Europe, all the rest of it, well, why not start at home? Why not work with the other nations within the United Kingdom? We've got a great story to tell as the United Kingdom, as the Conservative government. We the fastest reduction in emissions than any other country in the G7, the only country in the EU to legislate for net zero, and there are some fantastic announcements coming up later today from the main conference floor about how we're going to go further and faster on that. And I think that this is really a unifying cause, and if we can't make the case for the United Kingdom around what we can do together to solve the biggest problem facing our planet at this time, then I don't think we'll be able to make the case for the United Kingdom at all. So I think it's really important. Thank you for having the debate. I look forward to taking questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We now have Virginia Crosbie, who's the Member of Parliament for Anismone and also a renewables champion for CEN and Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Wales office.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me here this morning. I must give a big shout out to CEN. They are absolutely fantastic, and particularly Jack Richardson. And they are a real power force within Westminster. So I'm the Member of Parliament for Anismone, and you may know that also as Anglesey. And on Anglesey, we have wind, wave, tidal, we have solar, and hopefully, if I've got anything to do with it, we're going to have nuclear. Yeah. We've got the home of Wilvernewydd, which is the best nuclear site in the UK. The Prime Minister has said he's a fervent supporter, and it's my personal mission to make the most of what I believe is a national asset. I'll let you into a little secret. My nickname is Atomic Kitten. Along with Trudy Harrison, we set up and I co-chair the Nuclear Delivery Group. I'm also vice chair of the APPG on nuclear energy. I'm a real fantastic fan of the union, and I simply don't believe that we talk about it enough. I'm known as a team player, and I think we really need to work as a team, particularly on the environmental agenda. And what I see with devolution, I see both opportunities but also challenges. And I think the biggest challenge is how do we get the Welsh and the UK governments actually working together. I think it's really, really important that we work together. Some things are bigger than politics, and I believe we need to represent our constituents however they voted. People always laugh. In my office in Holyhead, there's no mention of the Conservatives. And that's because I'm there to represent absolutely every single person on the island of Anglesey, however they voted. And I think that's probably true of all my colleagues across the UK. We want to work together as a team. And these sort of inter-party squabbles just really don't help when we've got issues like climate change that are so, so important to the next generation and our very survival. So I'm fighting really, really hard for Wilfa Newydd, which will play a significant role in our 2035 and 2050 net zero targets. But most importantly, I stood on a manifesto to deliver one word, and that was hope. That was the reason why I got elected. That was the reason why I became the first Conservative MP for 32 years, because I was offering jobs, skilled employment and investment. And that's what nuclear will bring. But not only that, it will help us deliver net zero and this whole green agenda. So I'll work with anyone and everyone to deliver this target. And I really look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Now we go to Liam Kerr, who's the Member of the Scottish Parliament for North East Scotland and Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, Energy and Transport in the Scottish Parliament.
Thanks very much, Colin. Okay, in Scotland, you always have to keep two things in mind when we're having this sort of discussion. The first thing is that everything is viewed through the prism of separation. So whether it be a decision on Campbell, whether it be the net zero targets, everything will be played into questions about seceding from the Union. The second thing to bear in mind about Scotland is something that actually Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, said. And I'll quote this: "The Scottish Government is very good at setting goals. It is not so good at acting on them." And so to pick up on a point that Andrew Bowie just made, the context in which we find ourselves in Scotland is with a UK government, or a UK that cuts emissions faster than any G7 country, 44% in 3 decades. In the last 12 months, it's a UK that publishes plans to decarbonise power generation, heavy industry, oil and gas. It launches a hydrogen plan. You've all seen the front page of the Times today about Britain's renewable electricity. You will also, I'm sure, have seen about the interconnector from Norway to the UK. Contrast that with the Scottish Government, which has missed its legal, its statutory emissions targets for the last 3 years. The Climate Emergency Response Group says that 2/3 of the Scottish Government's key climate policies are not on track. Their recycling rate is worse than in 2016. Their energy company plans abandoned. And their waste incineration prevention, the moratorium that we were all promised, has now been pushed out. We don't know if it's going to happen, despite it being in the Green Party's manifesto. Ah yes, the Green Party manifesto, because of course in Scotland we have Greens in government. And that's very concerning for several reasons. I mean, just to put this in context, first of all, the Green Party definitely doesn't want Campbell. Now, I'm sure we're going to come back to the Campbell field later on. What the Green Party wants is to shut down our oil and gas industry within the next 4 years. Shut it down. What the Green Party manifesto also talks about is the Net Zero Technology Centre. You can guess what the Net Zero Technology Centre, which was set up by the UK and the Scottish Government money, 180 million in the City deal. You can guess what it's about. The Greens don't want to fund it. Carbon capture technology. So all the stuff, all the very good stuff we're going to hear from Nick later on Storegga. The Greens don't want us to do carbon capture. So that is the context that we find ourselves. I'm in the northeast of Scotland, so our biggest fear at the moment is about oil and gas. There are 60,000 jobs in my region which are connected to oil and gas. There's roughly up to 100,000 throughout the UK. The Greens want to shut it down, despite the fact that oil and gas accounts for about 3/4 of the UK's energy needs, and will still account for about half of the UK's energy needs by 2050. And by the time Cambo starts producing this Cambo oil field, supply will have declined in the UK by 33%, but demand will have declined by only 15%. Now, the UK solution to that, the Oil and Gas Authority points out that imported oil and gas, or imported gas, has double the carbon footprint of domestically produced gas. Sir Ian Wood, who I'm sure many of you are aware of, points out that if we offshore our responsibilities for oil and gas, we offshore it to regimes with perhaps less strict environmental and regulatory regimes. So we need a managed and fair transition. Sturgeon, the First Minister, equivocates and prevaricates and doesn't come down on a position. And that is where the UK can deliver a balanced, a managed, a fair transition. And they do it through things like the North Sea Transition Deal, 16 to 18 billion pounds of, I think, private leveraged finance to deliver that transition. And the other thing that I want to say, and I'll finish on this, is companies are already doing this transition. Okay, so my view is we must encourage that transition, we must encourage that training, we must encourage the world-leading work that Shell, Total Energies, that BP, that Storegga are developing right now to facilitate that transition. Or we can take the SNP approach, threaten the industry with closure, equivocate and virtue signal. The UK is going to deliver the former, the SNP the latter, and that is one of the many reasons why I back the UK.
Well, thank you very much, Liam. Now we're going to go to Nick Cooper, who is CEO of Storegga, here today on behalf of the Scottish cluster, and I think it's fair to say all-round expert in energy and corporate finance.
Thanks, Luke. That set me up to fail. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. I'm obviously not from a political background. My background is energy. Firstly, Storegga, which is a name I'm sure you'll not have heard of before. It's a private UK company. We're backed by some serious money from Singapore Sovereign Wealth, from Japan, from UK pension funds, and from Australia. And we're established to be effectively a reverse carbon cycle. We're not going to do anything that produces or introduces carbon molecules into the carbon cycle. We're doing the reverse as an independent UK player and potentially international to enable this transition to take place while we move from one fuel to another. So we're leading the Scottish cluster, which is one of the proposed UK CCS and carbon management chains. I'd start by saying realistically, when you look at the planet and the existential crisis we've got climate-wise, all of the UK clusters should be progressed at all pace. The world needs 2,000 to 3,000 of these projects, if you look at the consensus among researchers. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers, they should all be happening. In terms of Scotland, what we're finding is we're based up in northeast Scotland. The whole thing pivots around Peterhead and St Fergus, which is relatively remote, but we're tied into, firstly, large emissions point sources actually on our doorstep, big power plants, gas processing plants, and also by pipe to the industrial belt of Scotland, so INEOS and other players down there. So we have 9 separate sources of CO2 going into our system to start with. From all sorts of activities, industrial power, direct air capture. We're building the world's first at-scale direct air capture plant to take CO2 straight from the atmosphere and store it. And I think the point to make here is that Scotland and the UK have the dominance in carbon storage geology. We're lucky in that the rocks are in our favour. The UK and Norway have 90% of the total storage geology for the whole of Europe. And that's more than enough for our own needs. And so there's a huge business opportunity, if you like, for the UK and Norway, and specifically for Scotland and the UK. When we look at the Scottish cluster today, whilst we are working with Scottish emitters, we're also working with emitters from the other areas of the Union. There are plenty of industrial clusters and emissions points around the UK that did not have the right rocks next to them to store directly. So take, for example, the Bristol Channel area, Southampton Water, the Thames Estuary area. They do not have the right rocks for storing CO2. So all of those emissions need to be captured and shipped around the coast and up into areas like our Scottish cluster, where we've got more than enough storage. South Wales is another great example. Huge emissions point, but with no immediate storage. That CO2 will need to be moved around the country. And actually, as you get into the weeds of this, I've talked about big emitters, but if you move down to the smaller scale, which is still 500,000 tonnes or more a year of emissions, waste-to-energy plants around the UK. Around Manchester, there's 2 or 3 big ones. Around London, there's plenty more. Those plants need to get CO2 stored out of harm's way quickly and efficiently through the second half of this decade. And a lot of the CO2 is going to go by ship, but don't be surprised if you see it moved in ISA tanks on rail cars or perhaps even on trucks over time. So this is a countrywide challenge. It's a global challenge. And we need to think in bigger units, not smaller units, when we think about solving this. Anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. And finally, we'll hear from Luke Graham, a former head of the Union Unit in Downing Street and also former Member of Parliament for Oakhill and South Perthshire.
Thanks very much, Colin. Switch that over there. Good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, when it comes to kind of politics, especially in Scotland, you can't get away from the Constitution, so it creeps into pretty much everything. And I can tell you this firsthand when having to negotiate investment as part of city deals to my constituency, where we were disagreeing about whether something that was meant to be called the International Environment Centre then had to be called the Scottish International Environment Centre and the assistance of the SNP, when of course it was a British investment. So unfortunately, you cannot escape it. And it comes into every single discussion that you have. It comes into every part or level of investment that you want to make. And unfortunately, that is the way the politics is. A lot of people down south don't understand that. They say, no, of course not. You've got to be focused on outcomes. Everyone's can come together. No, you can't. And that's why within the government, we needed to look at our kind of constitutional settlement and look at ways, one, how you can work with local authorities and the devolved administrations, but also how the UK government itself can act unilaterally when it needs to, and actually when it can really take devolution as it's meant to and give power and investment to the lowest local level. And that's investing in local authorities. And so we were able to do that through the UK Internal Market Act that was introduced just 2 years ago. That's now on the statute books, so the UK government can make direct investments into any part of the UK, and it can fund people, businesses and local authorities. So there's a major opportunity there for us to not only help work with the devolved administrations, but also local authorities, local companies, local people. And you can get out, hopefully, of some of the one-upmanship between the UK government saying we'll be net zero by 2050, and then the Scottish government say, well, we'll be net zero by 2045. Because whenever you try and kind of work with some of the DAs, sometimes you always end up in a bidding war as well. We're going to give 5 million for a new centre. Great, we're going to give 5.1 million for the new centre because we're that much better and we care that much more about Scotland. And so sometimes you need the ability to act, and our constitution has to be flexible enough to work with local authorities, to work with devolved administrations, but also for central government to act where it needs to unilaterally to not only help local situations and local investment, but also make sure we're meeting our international obligations as well. So I'd say that from our view, and if you take the UK government's perspective and you take the UK as a whole, we have incredible natural assets. There's some really big opportunities, not just in carbon capture, but in geothermal, which I hope we get a chance to talk about later. There are a lot of unused former mines across the country, in Scotland, in Northern England, in Wales, that could easily be used for heat and power generation. And there's new technology coming for that. And if the local authorities or devolved administrations won't fund it, then the UK government definitely should. So there's lots of opportunities. We can be overwhelmingly positive, and we can try and steer clear of the politics. But let's face it, it's going to come and confront us every step of the way. So we need to be as positive and constructive as possible, but not be afraid to act unilaterally when it's going to be the interest of people in local communities.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much to the whole panel for their opening remarks. We can now open out to the question and answers. So please do raise your hand if you've got something to say, and let us know your name and where you're from, if appropriate. First of all, I think we've got the Member of Parliament for Banff and Buchan, David Duguid here, who's perhaps got something to say.
Yeah, well, I had a very...
If you could just wait till the mic comes.
I'll need that, so throat's gone. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Yes, as Colin says, I'm the Member of Parliament for Banff and Buchan, location of the St Fergus Peterhead Power Station and all that whole cluster. Obviously, it's connected with Grangemouth as well, but delighted to be here. And like I was about to say there, I had a very good question all set up, but between the lot of you, you all pretty much gave me very good answers to the question I was going to ask already. But I think generally, I agree with everything you're saying, everyone's saying, about the need to get past the politics and come together as a United Kingdom and get to the net zero we need to get to through the energy transition that we've already started. The energy sector has been doing this for decades in some shape or form or another. So I guess my question is, how do how do we convince the world at large that what we are doing as an energy sector, or what you guys are doing, or what we are doing as a government, and what the energy sector are doing, is actually already doing what we need to do, and we're not the big bad new big tobacco of the past? And how do we do that and make sure we see it's seen as something the United Kingdom comes together to do?
Well, thank you very much. Virginia Crosbie?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question, David. And I think the way we can actually do that is if we look at the Prime Minister's 10-point plan last year, it's all about jobs in the sector. And there's been a lot of talk over conference about levelling up, and this really is how we can focus on how we can focus on the environment by focusing on the jobs that it would create by area. If you look at my constituency of Moor, we've had decades of disinvestment, and the people on Moor and in North Wales, they really, really do want to contribute to net zero. They want to contribute to levelling up, and they want to have a nuclear power station. So I think if we can concentrate on the thousands and thousands of jobs that this will actually create on a UK-wide, I think that's the way to actually focus on it.
Andrew, would you like to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, David and I have spoken on this at length many times. But I think that the problem that we've got is the age-old problem that the energy industry in this country has. In that, if you're from the northeast, like the three of us here are, then you're aware of the oil and gas industry, you're aware of the work it does, you're aware of the direct, the huge contribution it makes to the local economy in terms of jobs and all the rest of it. If you're not, then you're just simply unaware of exactly what the energy sector in this country actually does. I remember being at conference here in 2017, and BP had a stand, and it was one of the most simplest graphics I've ever seen. It was a picture, a map of the United Kingdom with the number of jobs in each region which were reliant on the energy sector. And it was incredible. Thousands of jobs across the UK. The amount of colleagues of mine, through no fault of their own, who had no idea that there were that many jobs in the regions they represented reliant on the energy sector was quite astonishing, actually. So I think we've probably got to do a better job of championing the industry. The industry is doing a lot of great work. Their Vision 2035, all the rest of it, making the North Sea the first net zero basin in the world, whilst continuing to explore, which is necessary to keep the lights on. And we've just seen recently the fluctuations in gas price, all the rest of it. So we need to do a better job as politicians of championing the good that the sector is doing as we drive towards net zero and transition away from being almost wholly reliant on fossil fuels. And the energy sector, I think, needs to be less afraid of talking itself up. And if we work together on that, then I think we'll be able to make the case.
Well, that's very interesting, Andrew. I wonder if I could perhaps... do we have any questions in the audience, first of all? Okay, we've got the lady at the front here.
Hi, I'm Jess and I'm from Stirling. I'm 19. I left school at 16 to work as an accountant, but most of my friends are in university and they're all SNP and Green voters. So how do we kind of get the message out that actually caring about the environment has nothing to do with communism? And it's actually, it is actually something that the Conservatives are actually doing stuff on rather than just protesting about on the streets.
Well, you're in the right place because this is the Conservative Environment Network. I wonder if I could throw that one to the
environment.
I wonder if I could throw that one to Liam Kerr, who's very much on the vanguard against the nationalist government in Holyrood.
I think there are two things that we need to be doing to make the case. I mean, the first actually goes back to the previous two answers that you heard about jobs. And I mean, certainly you heard about the Acorn project and the power station that's up in in Peterhead, that's connected with this, has a very positive apprenticeship scheme and has taken on a load of new apprentices. So Dave Duguid was out there celebrating this just the other week. And I think that's a very positive message to be getting out. Look, this transition actually can take people of your generation, the people coming through behind you, into fresh jobs and into new skills and new areas that perhaps traditionally they wouldn't have thought to go into. And I think that's a very important message that we say, look, these are very good jobs. And this is where we think that you can be part of the country, Scotland's future and the UK's future. The second thing is, I think we need to make this case that I alluded to in my opening remarks about, certainly you'll be very familiar in Scotland, the tendency particularly with things like Cambo. So this is this oil field that there's an awful lot of protests. You've probably even seen it outside. Lots of people saying we shouldn't go ahead with this new oil field. And we have to make the logical argument here. The piece about demand. Demand is not going away. And I think a lot of people don't realize that oil and gas are part of everything we do. I had a very interesting conversation yesterday over coffee about exactly this, just how many things, medicine bottles, everything you do today will have some connection with oil and gas. And I think we need to, and no matter what we do, that demand is not going to go away. As I said in my opening remarks, we will still need oil and gas in considerable quantities by 2050. And we satisfy that demand either domestically or we satisfy it from somewhere else. And I think there's a very strong argument, I think it's an uncontestable argument that we should do that domestically. And that's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. And I think we have a responsibility to play up to that reality and not allow, if I dare say it, virtue signalling and ill-informed commentary to take over.
Well, thank you, Liam. I wonder if I could come back to you on that, because obviously you're a staunch defender of the oil and gas industry alongside colleagues. But is that potentially switching off people who might be more open to the unionist argument and are open to a sort of greener, cleaner future and want to hear that positive case about the transition? And you talk a lot about demand. Shouldn't we be talking about reducing demand so that we can meet our net zero targets?
Well, yes, and we are talking about reducing demand, but as I say, these aren't my figures. When I talk about 2050, these are the industry experts who are saying, look, this is just how it's going to be. So yes, we have to reduce demand, and as I said, by the time Cambo comes online, if it does come online, which I think is 2025, potentially, demand will have only dropped by about 15%. So yes, we have to look at that. But we also have to be realistic. Now, how do we put forward a unionist argument for oil and gas jobs? Well, I think we can do that, and I think we are doing that. So I alluded in my opening remarks to this North Sea transition deal. So this is a UK government, it does what it says on the tin, the North Sea transition deal, 16 to 18 billion pounds. Contrast that. The Scottish government about 6 weeks ago announced a Just Transition Fund, okay, to do what it says on the tin, to look for a just transition. It's worth £500 million. Okay, now that's a considerable difference straight away. But here's the thing. I put in 8 parliamentary questions to say, what does this mean? What does a £500 million fund mean? Who can get it? How do you get it? Who distributes it? Where does it go? Does it go to colleges? Whatever it might be. And I got 8 answers back, which were a copy and paste of the first one. Right? True story. All saying we don't actually know yet, right? Because they don't. It sounds great. The delivery is not there. And that's something we see, as I said in my opening remarks, this is something we see time and time and time again from the Scottish Government. So, North Sea transition deal makes the case for the union for a start. We have something called the deposit return scheme. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. Because there has not been a Four Nations approach on this, because the Scottish Government, again, decided to do something different, the papers up in Scotland today are reporting it may well be delayed coming in. The UK, the union is delivering a heat networks efficiency scheme. £4 million to upgrade heat networks. Scotland, we don't have it. And then, of course, there's ACORN that Nick talked about earlier. Carbon capture development, hydrogen production development. These are powerful arguments for the union, in my view. And I think all of it plays back to the climate emergency does not stop at the border. We can only achieve this, as you've heard from other panelists, we can only achieve what we need to achieve if we work together on this. And I think that's the most powerful argument for the union of all.
Well, thank you very much, Liam. And I should probably say we did some exclusive polling with Opinion about this panel, and the majority of the British public agree with you, Liam, that the UK can be a greater leader on climate change than the home nations individually. But I think Virginia wanted to come in on this question as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. It's a great question, and really, really great to see you here at conference. So in terms of young people, we really have to get the young people on side. And I think as a sector, I think certainly we could do an awful lot more in terms of our comms. I just came from a nuclear breakfast where they're absolutely dreadful. Nuclear makes 17% of our baseload, 17%. Yeah, we've got all but one large nuclear reactor coming offline in the next decade. How on earth are we going to achieve net zero without nuclear actually contributing? So we should be shouting about this. The rest of the world is looking at the UK. They think we've got all the pieces of a jigsaw. We've got in terms of fuel, we've got supply chain, we've got dealing with the waste, we've got absolutely everything we need for nuclear. We just can't be bothered to put the pieces together of the jigsaw puzzle. That's the reality. So that's the first point, is the comms. I think as a sector, energy, we can do an awful lot better. Secondly is young people. These are fantastic jobs in this sector, absolutely fantastic jobs. So let's get those people into those jobs. On Anglesey, the best advocate that I have are the apprentices that Horizon have established. And they can go in the room, they light up the room, they're so excited about engineering, about what they're doing for energy, they're excited about the environment, they're excited about actually having a future. So I think we need to make sure we're upskilling these young people, make sure that they realise there's some fabulous opportunities ahead of them, and let's make sure they've got those jobs and those roles to step into.
Look, Graham.
Thanks. I think, just thanks very much for the question. The biggest problem we have is that Conservatives, often when we do good things, we don't really tell many people about them because we just think, oh, well, what's next? And so we'll build a life science centre, we'll invest in agricultural projects, we're investing in new kind of internationally leading recycling technology in Perthshire. But very rarely would we actually press release that, get a government minister there, show it off, and actually show people the good things we're doing. So I think we need to do a little bit more of show, not tell, because we've got a great story in this area. And actually we can go and talk to, it doesn't matter whether you're young or old, we can get people excited about the projects that we're investing in, the new technology we're developing, and the new opportunities we're creating. And we just need to go out and talk a little bit more about it, and actually get out there and show people. So I think that's our real opportunity, and hopefully we may be able to detach that from kind of conservatism and communism in the process.
I think I spot a question from Torquil Crichton of the Scottish Daily Record. If we could, the mic could make its way over.
Hi, thank you, Torquil Crichton, Daily Record. 3 questions to the 3 elected politicians. Liam, presumably you want more nuclear power in Scotland. David Duguid, I know you're on the panel, but you must be worried about the betrayal narrative that'll come out if carbon capture storage goes to the north-east of England instead of the north-east of Scotland. And Andrew, why spend 20 billion on a bridge to Northern Ireland? You could spend half that money on interconnectors from the Hebrides and from Orkney and Shetland and solve all your renewable problems.
Liam Kerr.
Thanks, Torquil, and good morning. Where this question is coming from, so the nuclear question, so we have 2 power stations in Scotland which will shut imminently within the next 10 years. And that will clearly have an impact. I think the best answer I can give you, Torquil, is we need to be talking sensibly about this. Because to my mind, we are all committed to the offshore wind that's coming in there. We have a lot of onshore wind. But what we have seen this summer, of course, or this spring, is that sometimes that does not necessarily fulfill what we need in Scotland. Now, my concern, and I've put this to the Cabinet Secretary, is what will happen if we end up in a situation where we don't have the nuclear power stations because they've shut down in the next 10 years, but we aren't able to generate what we need for ourselves. And of course the answer is, well, we will have to source it. Again, going back to the strengths of the union, we will need to source energy from where we can get it. So again, I go back to the interconnector that's just come online from Norway. But I think there has to be a discussion about, are we not then beholden to go to England, to whatever power has been generated down here, and pull it up to Scotland? And I think that's a conversation that we have to be having, because it's not happening at the moment. As you know well, Torquil, the Scottish Government just says, no nuclear. But we're not going further. I say we have to have that conversation. I think we have to have a mature conversation about, look, there are nuclear power stations being built in various sizes, in various forms. The technology is moving on. and we have to get our power from somewhere because, going back to my earlier comments, we have a demand, and that demand's not going away. And if that means having a mature conversation about what we need to supply Scotland, then that needs to happen.
Andrew?
I thought it was David Dugan next on the Scottish cluster. But no, Torquil, should we be investing in interconnectors between the Outer Hebrides and Orkney and Shetland into mainland GB? Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be also investing in the infrastructure necessary to unite our country and take this country forward and allow people to move between the home nations of the United Kingdom easier. So whilst I don't think it's one or the other. Let's invest in the network, in the interconnectors. I mean, I was up in Orkney just a few weeks ago with the Scottish Affairs Committee. You know, they have the potential to be the renewable sector's super hub. They've got everything. They've got a hell of a lot of wind. They've got a lot of rain. The wave energy, the technology in that part of the renewable sector is coming on leaps and bounds, almost on a monthly basis. But they can't export it. They cannot get it, or all of it anyway, to mainland GB. So we should be investing in interconnectors between the islands where where renewable energy is being produced, getting it to mainland GB. But there's no reason why we shouldn't have a vision and a positive vision about building, exciting infrastructure projects to unite our country and move forward.
Well, thank you very much. I wonder if we should bring a mic over to David very briefly, if he wants to offer any remarks. And then we'll come to Nick Cooper.
Thank you very much. And Torquil, where are you? Oh, yeah, I see you. Thanks for that question. It raises a very important point that's already been alluded to by the panel. The SNP have already made these noises and words like betrayal and things. They would like nothing more than for the UK government to somehow not support something happening in Scotland, despite the fact that they supposedly stand for good things happening in Scotland. That's my opinion on that, anyway. But on the carbon capture storage sequencing that the UK government is currently considering, it is a competitive process. But because this government is already committed to carbon capture and storage and is well publicised and well known as being committed to carbon capture and storage, Nick was talking earlier about the investment, the private investment that's already coming into the country, coming into this project in particular, because of the UK government's very, very highly visible support of carbon capture storage, which has only been increasing in recent years. So the original target was for 2 operational carbon capture and storage clusters by 2030, and then that was brought forward to 2025, and then a further 2 by 2030. But as Nick said earlier, and I've read that same report, if we were serious as a planet about carbon capture and storage, we're going to need about 2,000 project acorns. So we're really just getting started. And for my part, obviously, I'm supporting the Scottish cluster, not just because it's Scottish, but it's going to bring huge jobs to my constituency. But it's going to do that anyway, whether or not it's part of that round 1 of the sequencing or round 2 of the sequencing. It's a very successful project. I'm looking forward to talking to Nick in a bit more detail about it later on today. So I think we shouldn't get too hung up on the SNP's desire for certain industries in Scotland to fail for political purposes.
But can I just say, you'll find no bigger champion of the Acorn project in Scotland than David here, and he is the champion, and he's working very hard to make sure it is first in the queue when the government finally make their decision.
Thank you, Andrew. That's very touching. I wonder if we could throw to Nick Cooper. I was interested when you were talking about CO2 being moved around the country and how important it is to have that UK-wide approach. Does it frustrate you when you see the Welsh First Minister, the Scottish First Minister butting heads with the UK government rather than sort of working together on these things?
That's politics, isn't it? No, I think I'll be apolitical on this. I mean, the reality is that that an energy transition. Let's face facts. Any energy transition historically has taken decades to effect, be it from charcoal to coal, coal to oil, oil to gas, into renewables. We're a decade or 2 into the renewable switch. Brilliant. We know that the ante is upped now because of the clear data on the climate, so we need to move very quickly on this transition. I think most people pragmatically would recognise you cannot switch off the current oil and gas complex and affect energy transition. We've seen that with the recent issues around the resilience of the energy system, and at the moment with the gas price. You know, it's just not practical. Hence the need for CCS, which effectively is buying us time to really roll out renewables. You know, it's not an either or, it's they throw everything at the situation, as long as it can make money and it's commercially rational. And so CCS has moved from sort of left field to centre stage, because it is not an excuse for the oil and gas industry to keep operating. That is wrong. That's really demonising the supply side. The reality is, it's a way that the demand side of the equation, that means everybody in this room and everybody we know, can continue to broadly live the lives we're living whilst we transition. Otherwise, we're going back to pretty much the dark ages. And if people want that, then it's fine, but I don't think most people on the street want that. So that's sort of the rant, and forgive me, that's the earlier question. I've got 3 teenage daughters and showing my age, and so this is played out around the dinner table every night at home. The other thing I'd say is that the energy transition in the UK, you know, anybody that claims they completely understand it is deluding themselves. We're all have got a pretty good idea of where it's going, but the fine details are still being worked out. But what is clear is that whilst we're sort of myopically focused on what goes on in Scotland and the UK, we are a long way ahead of where most of the rest of the world is in this sort of thing. And it's partly because we fiddled around with CCS on and off for 15 years, but we have actually got a template now that is being ever detailed and it's sketched that is very, very useful for the rest of the world. The world needs 2,000 to 3,000 of these projects. There are only 26 operational at the moment in the world. They're mostly in North America. They're not relevant because they're flushing more oil out of the ground. This is around collecting emissions from all sorts of sources and storing it permanently out of harm's way for hundreds of millions of years. And that's what we need. Now, the reason why, so we're focused on the UK, but what is clear is the rest of the world is very, very interested in what happens here and Norway with these sort of projects. And the reason why that is very important from a jobs perspective and a just transition perspective is if you wind the clock back to the 1970s when the oil industry rocked up from the States into Scotland, we learned how to do it in a more hostile environment. We had a skills base and a supply chain that built up to deliver that. And it was bonanza times for Scotland and for the UK. We built a huge industry, maybe not always understood in Westminster, but a huge industry with great global reach. And actually where we sit now is very, very similar. We are, without wanting to over-dramatize it, we're facing an industrial revolution where if we play it right, we are already a leader and we can really project this. The reason why we've got Singapore, Australia, Japan investing in our private British company is because they want to take these templates and roll them out for Asia Pacific. We're in conversations with North America, with Australia, with Southeast Asia. When the world needs 2,000 to 3,000 of these and we've only got 28 years to 2050, we don't have time to fiddle around.
Thank you very much, Nick. I wonder if we've got any more questions from the floor. We've got a gentleman at the back in the suit.
Gentleman in the suit. That narrows it down a little.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt Robinson, work for Tech UK. I've heard a lot about the pipeline for energy coming here, but I wonder what the panel's thoughts are about the pipeline of talent, because we have a real challenge in terms of skills and people being able to do these jobs, and is that going to come through across the UK and in Scotland in particular?
Virginia first.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And actually, he's got it written down here, so you're ahead of the curve. It is all about making sure we've got the skills, that the people actually have the skills to actually fulfill these jobs. So I think it's absolutely critical. I had an hour with the Chancellor last week, and he said, Virginia, whenever I see all the other MPs, they're always asking for a roundabout or they're asking for a bypass, but you're always asking for this £20 billion for a nuclear power station. Have you got anything smaller? I said, well, it's strange you should ask, because I sort of had my sort of wish list. And on that wish list was actually ensuring that we've got some nuclear apprenticeships. And we get here in North Wales, we've got Bangor University. I've got MSpark, which is the science park in North Wales. And I think it's absolutely vital that we ensure the next generation have got these skills. And particularly if you look at Hinkley C, and you look at the nuclear sector, you can have generations of people working in the same nuclear power plant. If we can get Will van Erith off the line, that's 60 years that nuclear power station will be serving the whole of the UK. And that's thousands of families that will actually benefit from that. But I think this is a fantastic opportunity now to make sure we've got these young people have got the skills ready to take up these new roles. And as Luke mentioned, really we do punch above our weight in terms of the UK. In the 50s and 60s, we were leading the nuclear sector, and I'm really excited, and I really want to make sure we actually get back to that and really start driving this whole environmental change.
Thank you very much. Andrew, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, David Jugge just handed me a piece of information which I wasn't aware of, but a recent Robert Gordon's University study says that 90% of the skills needed by the renewables industry already exist in oil and gas. So it's about transitioning these workers from their existing jobs in oil and gas into the renewable sector. I mean, the government's doing a lot, T-levels, apprenticeships, investing in STEM subjects to upskill and to get the workforce ready for this big change which is coming down the path. Are we there yet? No. Have we got a long way to go? Absolutely. But are we aware of it? Are we investing in the right places? Yes.
Liam Kerr, do you think that the right policies are in place right now to allow oil and gas workers to transition to renewables? What else do we need to see from the Scottish or UK governments?
So, in terms of policies, I mean, let me just take that previous point as well, because I think it goes towards the same thing. As you've heard from previous speakers, we already have the talent. We have an extremely highly skilled industry in oil and gas, and more widely, and in the supply chain. And as you've just heard from Andrew, those skills are portable. I'll come back to a caveat on that in a second. I mentioned earlier about apprentices, and so it's very important that not only do we have apprenticeships for younger people particularly to undertake, but not exclusively younger people, of course, but that people can see a future. And I think that comes to the core answer of this, and where the union is so important, that at the moment, I think that what you can see is a UK government, a union, which is very positive about the future, both for the oil and gas industry as it transitions, but also about renewables and future technologies. And I think what we have to see from both governments, from all governments in the UK, is that confidence, is that acting together, and is that unified approach to saying to industry, to entrepreneurs, to investors, there is a future here. And here's how we're going to get there, and here's the support we're going to make. Here are the policies we've got in place. So you asked me specifically about, are the policies in place? Well, I immediately point to this North Sea transition deal. I can't help but point to it. It's £16 billion plus. But what we need to see is that joined up approach from the governments to say, we support the industry, not the equivocation, for example, that we saw from Nicola Sturgeon on Cambo, where it's a will she, won't she. How can any investor look at that and say, this is an industry with a future that I want to invest in? It's not leadership, it's not governance. What we need to see is what the UK has been doing, mirrored throughout all the devolved administrations.
And not Patrick Harvey's workers in the oil and gas sector should find new jobs, which was what he said in the run-up to the Scottish election. You know, creating fear for so many households who are worried. They hear transition, they hear talk of the oil and gas sector closing down, and they are worried about their futures and their families and all the rest of it. And we need to do exactly what Liam says. And it would be nice if the Scottish Government shared the same ambition as the UK Government in terms of investing in the right areas to get our workforce to the place that they need to be.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Perhaps the lady at the front here. Sorry, John, making you walk all the way.
Thanks. It's connected to all the discussions that we've had about young people. With education being devolved, how do we manage that development of skills for this sector through schools so that we're not just having people coming out and going into apprenticeships, but they're actually that interest is being generated right the way through schools from the start, when the Welsh and Scottish governments are in charge of education in their areas.
Look, Graham.
You're quite right, education is devolved. However, there is, inside the UK Internal Market Act, a provision that allows the UK government to spend on educational activities and facilities. So in theory, the UK government could start working with the devolved administrations to produce a new skill curriculum that could work for the whole of the UK. And obviously, I think it would be beneficial to try and work with the DAs to try and implement that right across the country, because a young person in Alloa deserves as much opportunity as they do in Bristol or Belfast or Cardiff. And so I think there is a great opportunity there. There is legal power to try for the UK government to get the ball rolling. Obviously, it would be politically contentious, so it would be better for that to come from the devolved parliaments themselves. But I think actually working together, using some of the intergovernmental machinery to have UK standards and UK targets could be a good approach.
Liam, I think you want to come in very briefly on that.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it's a fantastic question. And recently I was in a place called Newton Aycliffe, which is near Darlington, visiting Hitachi, who are building new trains. And they talked about how the other train manufacturers are available, of course. I just happened to be at Hitachi. But they had gone out. So I said to them, where are you getting your talent from? Because there's a lot of talent that I'm going around seeing of all age groups. And where is that coming from? And they said, well, we've gone out to the local schools. We've gone out to the local colleges. The point I was going to make to the earlier question is we need to ensure not only that we're teaching people what they need in these skills, but that there's someone to teach those skills. And so that's part of the program that they'd been doing in the local area to try and upskill the local workforce and keep it local, keep that economy, really help the economy. And there's a very pertinent example from up where Dave Ducat is at Peterhead. There's a company called the Score Group, which for years was taking on huge numbers of apprentices, but also proactively going out to the local college and going out to the local schools and saying, these are good jobs. Come and work for Score. We will help you. We will give you that ambition. And quite genuinely, if you come to us, the world opens up for you. And that, I think, is hugely exciting for a young person, particularly in the Northeast, who can see their horizon is not just Scotland, it's not just the UK, it's the world. And we can train that, and it's private industry that can help in that.
I mean, we're very lucky in the northeast of Scotland. I was very lucky at school that there's a tradition of the private sector coming into schools to inspire and teach youngsters and to teach them of the opportunities available in the energy sector. I'd suggest that I think over half of the guys and girls I was at school with ended up working in the energy sector in some form or another. And I'm from Inverurie. It's very much a town on the outskirts of Aberdeen, and the energy sector drives the local economy. But we need to encourage the energy sector to do that across the UK. Because it's like the point I was making earlier, it's all well and good us in the northeast of Scotland knowing about all the good that sector is doing. But for vast amounts of people in this country, they haven't got a clue, and they just see this. They imagine this, as David said, it's the new big tobacco, the oil and gas industry. So we need to encourage them and support them to get into schools and start teaching kids today about the opportunities that are available in the energy sector of the future. And yeah.
I think you're right. Sorry, if I could just come back on that. I think where you've got energy sector already, you've got that experience, those skills, those people locally, and you've got kids going out and talking to parents, talking to friends, and they can see those jobs available. In areas where you don't have that, how do you move it into there, particularly when it's a devolved nation and teaching staff, not necessarily just the education sector, but teaching staff don't want to do it.
Yeah, very important questions. I wonder if I could come to Virginia on the issue of free ports, because is there potential for free ports to be a sort of flagship unionist policy? But we have seen some friction between the devolved governments and the UK government over them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every person on this panel started their sort of introduction with highlighting how important it is that we actually all work together and then with there is strength in our union. And I think if you take that example of free ports, that's an example, unfortunately, as to how people are not working together. On the 11th of November last year, England released their Freeport bidding prospectus. They announced it closed in February, and the Chancellor in his budget in March announced the free ports in England. Where are we with Scotland? Where are we with Wales? In Scotland, there's this toing and froing between Nicola and Alistair Jack, letters flying everywhere. In Wales, we've actually had no traction whatsoever. And indeed, it's actually dire for us because we've got Liverpool is now going to be a free port. So we're going to see the lifeblood being sucked out of the north of Wales. We're going to see Liverpool actually booming, whereas actually we don't even have a prospectus here in Wales. And I think it's quite important for the whole sort of environment issue, because I set up and I chair the Anglesey Freeport Bidding Consortium, and the UK government has committed to having at least one free port in Wales, and I've had big discussions with ministers about this. So I'm essentially taking companies around the island, and they want to invest in the island, and we're known as Energy Island. So you can imagine a lot of the companies looking to invest are that we're all singing off the same page in this room. But they really do need some traction. So everything I'm trying to do is to try and get free port status for Anglesey, and then we'll see nuclear, then we'll see more wind, wave, tidal. They really will open up the floodgates for investment. And what we see from the First Minister and Welsh Government, he actually sort of says, no, if we've got a free port in North Wales, we'll see investment coming from the rest of Wales, and that's simply not the case. The companies I'm taking around, like Tratos, is a solar cabling company. We simply don't have that ability in the UK. So to have a solar cabling company on Anglesey creating more than 300 jobs, having a huge factory, really will put us on the map on a global scale for solar cabling. Rolls-Royce, they're not looking to invest anywhere else in Wales. They're looking to invest in Anglesey because it has the potential to have free port status. So this is not about moving investment from the other places. It's actually making sure we get investment from the rest of the world. So this whole free port issue is a real example of how not to work together.
Well, thank you very much. I think given the time, we'll need to move to closing comments. So I wonder if the panellists, and I'll come to Nick Cooper first, I wonder if the panellists could think about the upcoming COP summit and what the UK government could be doing to showcase the strength of working together, both domestically and on the world stage. And also pick up on this point about decarbonisation projects and clusters across the UK, and whether we should be prioritising only value for money, or whether we should actually be thinking about constitutional considerations as well. But I'll come to Nick Cooper first.
Okay, right. So I guess three things would be on my wish list. One would be that the UK government starts to make it clear that it's not picking one technology or another. It's, you know, the net zero toolbox has a lot of things in it. Yeah, obviously renewables and crucial, CCS and the others as well. And I think making that point very clearly, both domestically and internationally, is very important, because people don't understand it yet. I guess second, and you know, and that plays into the security of supply issue as well. And secondly, I'll just stick to 2 points. I think secondly, when the world needs 2,000 to 3,000 of these projects to get to net zero, and when the UK has, by luck or design, got a bit of a head start, the government should be sanctioning all three of the leading clusters, so the North East, the North West, and Scotland, which have got the advantages and can be rolled out from the middle of the decade onwards. We can blow the doors off the 10 million tonnes per annum target as part of the 10-part plan. We can be a huge step forward for the UK in terms of its own net zero requirements, but also projecting itself and helping. This is about helping, not being divisive, helping other parts of the world to roll out the same template. So those would be my two wishes.
Thank you very much. Luke Graham, your closing comments?
So I think there's a great opportunity through working with the environment and UK government, working a little bit more assertively in the space. We've set some really ambitious targets. I think now's the time to lean in. I think now's the time to, if anything, be radical. We've talked about education and skills. Let's have the National Centre for Excellence of Life Science and Environment funded by the UK government in Scotland, and then linked to all the schools nationwide across the UK. Let's make sure that we're there improving our connectivity, improving our energy networks, investing in geothermal, and really putting the money where our mouths are when it comes to the environment right across the country. So I think it's time to lean in, be radical, and work with the DAs as much as we can. And when they get too political, well, face them down when we need to.
Liam Kerr.
I'll be brief, Chair. I think I'd just go back to my original comments on this. The UK, I think, has shown the ambition, but has successfully backed that ambition with concrete action and achievements. And I think the Scottish Government can and should be part of that. I think that collaborative approach is one that I would certainly look to take, and I'll continue to press the Scottish Government to do so, because, as I mentioned earlier, I do not think, well, we know the climate emergency does not stop at the border, and it's only by working together and collaboratively that we can achieve all that we need to.
Thank you. Andrew Bowie? Yeah, so I agree with everything everybody said already, which you'd expect me to say. But I can't. I just thought we've sat here for an hour, and it's the first time COP's been mentioned. In 3 weeks' time, in Glasgow, the UK government is going to be hosting the world to discuss this very issue. It's only happening Scotland is not hosting COP. COP's taking place in Scotland, absolutely, and we're very proud of that. I was in the room under the previous Conservative administration when the decision was taken. So it's going to be in Scotland. That's brilliant. We're going to roll out the red carpet, but it's the UK government. This is an example of the Union in action. The United Kingdom leading the way on the biggest issue of our time, and it's taking place in Scotland as a result of the UK bidding for this conference. I think it's a brilliant signal to the rest of the world. I think it's a brilliant signal to Scotland that the UK does not, that the UK government's responsibilities do not end at Hadrian's Wall, and I think it's going to be a great advert for us and what we are doing in terms of taking action on climate change.
Thank you very much. And to finish us off, Virginia Crosbie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about COP26. I'm even more excited that the Prime Minister actually has been mentioning nuclear and really positioning nuclear as green electricity. So we really are leading the way. My plea is for the government. I think the government does need to play a significant role here. I mean, clearly with large nuclear reactors, there's the risk, they're big capex projects, and I'm looking for the UK government to really take that lead. So whether it's things like the RAB, the regulated asset-based model that we use for the Thames Highway Tunnel, or whether it's looking at getting some, taking that risk for SMR, small modular reactors, and essentially the government playing a role to unleash that private finance, that private investment in this sector. And I'd like to end by saying that nuclear is a solution. It's a solution. We can achieve net zero with nuclear, we get levelling up, and it's our opportunity to really lead on the global stage in a fantastic sector.
Well, thank you very much. I wonder if the room could join me in thanking our panellists for the time. Well, I think that was an excellent discussion with a lot of ground covered. I'm sure we could have gone all day, but I'd like to thank the panellists once again and thank the Scottish Cluster for their sponsorship. For those in the audience, you can go to sen.uk.com or approach a member of the SEN team at the end of the event if you'd like to join our counsellor or supporter network for absolutely free, or just grab a copy of one of the items of merchandise we've got over to your right. But do stick around for our next event in this room at 12 p.m, which is the Great British Conservation Market, sponsored by RSPB with Secretary of State George Eustice. Thank you.